We live in such a pathetic victimhood culture.
We do.
Right? Where everybody thinks that being a victim is a good thing.
I agree.
It's like when people say, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I just passed my driving test at the 8th attempt. It's like, why the f are you proud of yourself?
But it's preposterous what you said about Wenger.
Rubbish.
It's preposterous.
History has proven me completely right.
How?
But if you're going to confront the world heavyweight boxing champion, you're going to get a smack in the face, and you shouldn't moan about it.
And that's fine.
Or have your little feelings hurt.
And that's my feelings aren't hurt.
They are a bit. Arteta is a natural successor in world football to be the next Pep. I cannot say enough highly about everything about Arteta.
This is Up Front with me, Simon Jordan. I believe there are a lot of vacuous, uninformed, unchallenged opinions out there. I want to get to the bottom line and cut through the nonsense. So on this podcast with William Hill, I'm going to get people with strong views who think they can stand them up under proper scrutiny. There's a good chance I might learn something along the way, but more importantly, so might you. Joining me today is a big beast from the media world. Instantaneously recognisable, someone who divides opinion and concentrates minds in equal measure, with a Rolodex that most people would die for, a celebrity, an author, and a journalist, and also, in keeping with the ethos of this show, a huge sports fan. Piers Morgan, welcome to Up Front.
Simon Jordan, good to see you.
Nice to see you. I was saying to the guys before they said, we want to get Piers Morgan. And I said, nah, Piers Morgan won't do this show. The last time he and I had a conversation, he didn't want to take interview tips from me. So
no, but I like that. I actually thought you were right, by the way. I wouldn't have admitted it to you live on air, but I went away from that because it was in the middle of my Ronaldo victory lap, which I was taking, where I thought obviously I had the best interview of all time and
best scoop.
And most people were agreeing with me. And then I got to you, and of course you lasered in as you do on my probably the one moment in the interview where if I went back again, I would have asked that follow-up question because I pride myself on the details. And you rightly said, well, who was he talking about? And I remember walking away and thinking, damn it, he was right. So fair enough.
But to coin your expression about interviews, an interview is only as good as his tools, right?
Yeah.
So I've got some pretty good tools here, so I should be all right, shouldn't I?
You should do it.
Listen, before we get into you, I mean, this show is, you're the first person on this show that's not from a sporting background.
Well, you say that, hang on. How many of your other guests have got Brian Lara out for naught? How many have beaten Serena Williams at tennis?
Hang on. Moment, wasn't it?
How many have beaten Serena Williams at tennis? How many have a picture
what was she
of them
playing with, a frying pan at the time?
bumping with Ernie Els after draining a 30-foot putt at the BMW Pro-Am, right? I could go on.
Right.
But this idea I'm not a sporting guest, I take some exception to.
Can you beat scoring the second ever goal at the new Wembley Stadium?
Did you do that?
I did that.
Really?
That was me.
That's quite impressive.
We have these moments to share.
I just think getting Brian Lara out for naught in front of 10,000 people, having predicted on the coach there on video, I'm going to do you today. Best batsman arguably of my lifetime. Come on.
No doubt.
That's a sporting achievement.
I'll take that. That gives you even more validity in this conversation. Before we get into you and your journalistic career and the subject matters we want to talk about, we've had a big announcement. You know, we've got a general election being called.
Yeah.
What do you make to that? July the 4th, Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Yeah, I think most people want to be independent of the Tories these days, don't they?
Well, they do. The polls say that. I don't think it's going to be as one-sided as the polls suggest. It normally tightens. The economy is definitely beginning to slowly improve. Sunak is clearly banking, I think, on riding that very small wave and saying, I suspect what his strategy will be, we're beginning to get things right. The green shoots are coming. Why would you risk it all with Labour, whose spending commitments will be very draconian on people, on the middle classes and the rich? That's the kind of way he'll come at this. I was struck by one thing, and it's my old newspaper editor hat on, that the optics of the announcement were so clumsily handled. All I saw was a beleaguered Prime Minister standing outside number 10 with rain soaking down on him. Right, and he looked like a drowned rat.
Yeah.
The headlines are not going to be what he hopes tomorrow. They'll all be variants of drowning street. It's only going to get wetter. Blah blah blah. I can see it now because it's a gift to headline writers, a gift to newspapers, and they'll take a negative slant on it. When in fact it's quite a bold move to go early as he is. You know, it's
but they're done, aren't they?
Well, I never say done.
They're done.
People always it looks that way. Yeah. But I always remember about certainties. I was at Harlow Journalism College, at Harlow Tech for a year, getting my NCTJ, National Council of Training and Journalist certificate. I had a great time, and I had a guy there called Mark Stillman, who was one of the lads on the course. It was the year of Steve Davis and Dennis Taylor in that snooker match, the World Championship.
82?
So around then, yeah.
85.
85.
Yeah.
85.
Yeah.
I was 19.
Yeah.
And if you remember, obviously it went down to the last black, the famous last thing. And Taylor won. So Mark Stillman had gone to the bookmakers day before when I think Davis was, from memory, 6 or 7-0 up.
Mm-hmm.
And he was looking for a surefire bet to turn his £800 grant for the year into 900 or 1,000.
Right, okay.
He needed a bit more. So he looked around and he thought, surefire bet, Steve Davis. He's 8-1 on. I could put the 800 on
and
I'll win 100. Yeah. Done. I watched that final frame with him as Mark Stillman saw the most surefire bet in the history of sport crashing around his ears. That's what happens when you think everything is a surefire bet. Here's the key thing with politics: events.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what will happen between now and July the 4th. Although I can guarantee you something will. Something will happen on the campaign trail. Something will happen globally. We're in a very precarious time. And all of these things can have a material effect on whether a government gets deposed, as many people assume it will be, or whether they don't. And if Starmer wins, how does he win? Can he win an outright victory? Probably unlikely. Is it going to be a hung parliament? Yeah, that will strangle his ability to deliver on a manifesto. So I think, look, at the moment, the bookies are rarely wrong, but sometimes surefire bets can come back and bite you.
Have we got, Piers, the politicians that our country, our society, and our media deserves?
I think Rishi Sunak's a decent guy.
So do I.
I think Keir Starmer's
a decent guy.
Keir Starmer's a decent guy. I spent a lot of time with both of them. I think they're decent people. I think they genuinely want the best for their country. They're not like Boris. They're not like carousing, rule-breaking party boys. That's not their thing at all. They're not like Liz Truss, where they try and deliver undeliverable, ludicrous policies overnight, which virtually bankrupt the country. They're not massive risk takers. They're quite dull, I guess, in terms of public perception. But after Boris, I'm quite happy for the next leader to be dull. I just think
it's what's behind them, Piers. It's the quality. It's the quality of people behind them.
I think that's true, and I think the general level of politicians is very poor.
Because I look at this group of politicians we've got now, particularly in the Tory party. I grew up voting Tory. My father was a trade unionist, so I should have been a Labour voter. But as a capitalist mentality, I obviously lean towards the Tories. I'm probably centre-right. And I look at this group of people and I think they commit an act of self-harm. They're arrogant. They're more interested in vested interest and preserving their own opportunity rather than actually serving the country. And I think the biggest criminal of all that was David Cameron. I thought it was an absolute coward in 2016 and left us in the hands of a buffoon in Theresa May.
And he said he wouldn't do that. He said if he lost, he would stay and fight on. He didn't, which I thought was reprehensible.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think I've always voted for people rather than parties.
Me too.
I've voted on both sides.
Me too.
And I look for people who I genuinely think have a head of steam by them, have a bit of charisma, have a direction and a plan.
People and policies.
And an ideology, right? Whether you love them or hate them, and actually they're both good examples of people that loved and hated them. Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, in America, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama.
Agreed.
All for that, and in his own way, Donald Trump. All in their own way have their thing which resonates with people.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that,
and
then,
connects with them, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think at the moment I wouldn't put Rishi or Keir Starmer into that category of people. That's why I think it's a quite unusual election where there's not a groundswell sweeping towards one of these people. They're not going to be moved by charisma or spark of great personality. And it'll be interesting when they actually unveil their manifestos, whether people think they can deliver them. I mean, we're in still very tough economic times.
Absolutely right.
A lot of inflation issues still raging, cost of living massively high for so many people. And they've got to believe one of these two people over the other one. And it's going to be an interesting calculus. If Labour starts saying,
what battleground they fight it on.
Yeah.
But let's go into you. Right? Why journalism for you? What was it about that industry that you admired and aspired to be part of?
From the age of like 6, 7, my mother said, obsessed with newspapers. That's all we had then. There was no internet, nothing like that. I used to read the Daily Mail. Well, I used to avidly read it. My mum said I would talk about headlines from the age of 6 or 7. That's not normal. So it was obviously in my blood. My grandfather had been an investigative journalist helping various politicians with big inquiries and things. So there was a bit of stuff in the family. Definitely in my blood. I had an absolute hunger for information. I loved being the first with news.
Yeah.
I mean, you could call it a gossip, I guess, but I liked just knowing stuff and imparting it to people. I found that exciting. I liked, as I got older and went to journalism college, I liked the idea of being able to cover almost anything in the world that's happening. And if you're a journalist, most jobs you wake up, you have a reasonable idea what you're going to be talking about. And you probably have the same thrill about your job, is that you never really know, right?
Mm-hmm.
One day you wake up and suddenly all hell's broken loose in some sport and off you go. I feel that every day with my job. It's like today, for example, I interviewed the president of Israel and then Dennis Quaid, the movie star.
Yeah.
Then I had a big panel debate about trans women in sport after these big stories in America of trans athletes winning state tournaments and so on. And then I interviewed the OnlyFans model who hijacked the Ireland to America dome thing, the virtual link, another crazy random interview. And I finished all that and thought, I've got to go and do Simon Jordan now. And my PA was like, do you really think that is the best way to end a day like today? I went, you know what? Yes. Because actually I like to push myself.
Yeah.
I like to be challenged. I like a good argument. And I think like you, believe fundamentally a free democracy lives or dies on the ability and readiness of its people to better speak their mind, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression are the bedrocks of any society.
It's balanced with, I mean, a freedom of speech doesn't come with that freedom of consequence, though, does it?
Of course.
You know, and too many people want that.
Always,
too many people want to be able to say exactly what they want to say.
There's always consequence. But the idea that people these days are cowed, as many are, into actually saying what they really think about stuff. And the idea that we can't have a good old tear up, which I'm sure we will over various things today, the idea that we can't do that, and at the end of it, shake hands and go and have a beer or whatever it may be.
That's the big thing.
I find that the saddest thing about modern society.
Me too. I sit there. I mean, I get emotionally invested in conversations. I get, diametrically opposed in views, but I'm more than capable of moving away from a conversation and saying, well, you know what? You think what you want to think, and I'll think what I want to think.
I loved your tear up with Frank Warren, who's an old mate of mine, right?
Yeah, he's a big mate of mine as well.
And I really enjoyed that. Yeah. You both got into it. It was like two rutting stags. But as an impartial observer watching it, loved it.
It's engaging.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you still consider yourself a journalist now?
Absolutely. I have done through every job I've ever done, whether it's been judging talent shows or hosting a morning show or going to CNN or running newspapers, whatever it is, the common thread for me has been my journalism and being a journalist, someone who can spot talent, stories, make noise, be at the center of things. It's all the same.
What's the most important element of journalism? Because I worry about journalism in this country and the lack of nuance and the lack of context and the binary views that people seem to formulate. And you can be guilty of that at times. So when you look at journalism, what is the most important element of it? Is it objectivity? Is it being able to break a story? Is it the scoop? Is it...
Well, I love scoops. I won't pretend that I don't. I love a good scoop, and I'm pretty good at breaking them. But I also think truth is the absolute number one thing. I think the least defensible thing of any journalist ever is arguing black is white when we can all see it's black, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So fundamentally, you've got to start from the truth. And all this crap we have these days about my truth, as if somehow there's a variant of the truth that you can concoct that suits your own purposes. I find it ludicrous.
But a truth that steers into clicks, though, Piers.
I don't agree.
There was an element of that, isn't there?
Listen, I always laugh when people say something when I ran newspapers. You're just doing this to sell papers. Yes.
Yeah, but that's the object of the aim. Yeah.
Sorry, you're doing this podcast because you want people to watch.
Yeah.
Right? If nobody watches this, neither of us wins. Right? I will help you promote this to my gazillions of social media followers because I want to be the number one guy you interview.
Yeah.
I want to see those numbers and think I've beaten John Terry. Particularly John Terry, because that will be an Arsenal-Chelsea thing. But I'm very competitive like that. So whether I've done that or I've done television or I've done whatever it may be, I just want people to watch or to click or to at least show some interest because otherwise, why am I doing it? I'm not howling into some empty wind.
But there has to be substance behind it sometimes,
of course.
Doesn't there? I mean, my style of broadcasting, I mean, I've sort of landed in the media space and we're going different ways, you and I. I was once upon a time the story, right? And now I'm the person sort of interrogating the story. And you and your career, you've become a person.
I've been both.
But you're more now actually the hunted. I mean, you're a bit of both. And how has that been an adjustment for you?
It's fine. I've always had that. I mean, I had it when I was a newspaper editor. I've had it through my television career. I have it now. I'm a YouTuber. I think it goes for the territory. And look, I'm in no position to say to people, back off, right?
Yeah.
Now, I always think that people misconstrue what freedom of speech means. For example, I think you have an absolute right to ask me in this podcast anything you like. But I have a right not to answer.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't compel me to answer a question. And it's not a breach of freedom of speech for me to say, actually, I'm not going to answer that. Right? I try and be pretty open about stuff. I try and be honest with people. But there are certain things I just will not talk about, as most people would feel. But I'm always prepared to listen to other views.
Yeah.
I'm always prepared to listen to criticism. Sometimes, like I said, when you called me out on Ronaldo, I went away, it annoyed me in the moment. I made a little ding-dong, but afterwards I reflected and thought, well, you were right. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I hadn't actually even thought about that. Nobody had asked me. And that was a credit to your, I would say, surging journalistic chops.
You reckon?
Simon. Yeah, I think you're good.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think I like about
I don't
you
know how I
is,
feel about that.
well, you
I
do your
had-
research is what I like about
I
it.
had these sort of mixed emotions about journalism. When someone tells me I'm a journalist, I always feel like I want to go have a bit of a wash. So
Why?
Well, because I find your profession at times difficult to
Our
contend
profession. Get with the program, Simon.
See, I'm participating in the media.
I love the way you don't think you're a journalist.
That's my view.
What do you think you're doing now?
Oh, I'm having a conversation with you.
Well, that's what?
I'm sharing
An
views.
entertainer?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm being told
No,
these
you're
days.
not.
I
You're
think
a
I'm more
journalist.
entertaining.
Whether you
than
want to admit it or not, you are one of the great unwashed journalists.
Well, but we'll,
by the way, you're a good one
we'll
because you
agree to
annoy
disagree.
We'll
agree to
the fuck out of
disagree.
people, right? You're belligerent, you're cantankerous, you go after people, but you're a dog with a bone. Most of the best journalists I've met in my life are exactly like that.
Well, what I think I do, and I think you're probably similar, is I can see bullshit, and I don't like people that don't have any substance.
Correct.
And I make them stand up their arguments.
Correct.
And they're having a debate with somebody. Everyone can say what they want, as long as they can stand it up.
Yes.
And if they can't stand it up, they can get what's coming their way.
Exactly.
How did you get to be? You and I share something in common amongst, I think, probably several views on the world. But you got into a position very young of being the editor of a major newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get yourself into? I mean, I know the backstory, but how do you, as an individual, get yourself into a position? And what does it feel like? You're 29, 28, 29 when you become the editor of the News of the World. I'm 31. When I sell a business for 100 million quid and go buy a football club, and it all goes with responsibility. I have thousands of employees in the mobile phone business, and then I have thousands of people around the world watching the football club that I own, and all the responsibility that goes with that. What's that like for you?
Well, the younger you are, the better. You know, Alex Ferguson always said the great thing about teenage players is they play with no fear. As they get a bit older, they get more responsibilities, they get married, they have kids, they start to have to think about other people. But when they're in their late teens, early 20s, they're thinking about themselves, and they play with that freedom. But the
flip side is you don't have any wiseness either. You
correct,
don't have any experience.
correct. And you have to learn on the job very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I was made editor of the News of the World, the biggest selling paper in the world at the time, age 28, by Rupert Murdoch, who literally walked me along a beach in Miami for 3 hours and didn't tell me why I was there until we went to a party that night. He just bought the NFL rights for Fox. And we went to a party and introduced me to a guy called Dave Hill, who you may have come across, who was the great Aussie genius behind Sky Sports and then Fox Sports. And he introduced me, said, Dave, this is a friend of mine from London, Piers Morgan. He's the new editor of the News of the World. That's how I found out. And I remember ringing my mother, who's the only person I think of who would still be up. And it was a long silence. And she went, that's great. She was a Daily Mail reader.
But what was your reaction?
My reaction was I was stunned. And then my reaction, because I've got a healthy, self-confident stroke,
belief in
arrogant streak, whatever you want to call it, was I can do this. And the thing I would say about when I was at The Sun doing the Bazaar column for 5 years, which I did then, was that enabled me. The days when newspapers had plenty of cash. So I used to fly around the world first class, stay in great hotels and interview the biggest stars in the world. If you hang around big enough stars long enough, you start to want to be one of them. You start to enjoy them. Yeah.
Well, your personality does.
I did.
Yeah.
I love the limelight. I love being center of attention. I love fame, good, bad, and ugly. Still do, good, bad, and ugly.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I like it. It's fun.
Why?
It's
a bit vacuous, isn't it? I don't look at it. I
Really?
look at not at all.
I don't really believe it.
I'm very rarely impressed with people. I have no real motivation to be
Oh God, I've
around
been
famous
impressed
people.
by so many people.
You have?
Oh, when I was put in a little tent for 15
What, you mean
minutes.
yourself?
No, not with myself, but no, with Nelson Mandela once.
Well,
right?
yeah, that's
in
understandable.
London,
yeah.
we sat there for 15 minutes. I've interviewed the Dalai Lama. I've interviewed 5 American presidents. 10 British prime ministers, the biggest stars in the world, from Beyonce to whoever. And I find, and sporting...
And have they all lived up to your expectations? Because I've often felt that people I've met have been so bloody disappointing.
I'll tell you how, it's interesting, they never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
Cricketers are unique in that every one of them I've met, my heroes, I've loved.
Really?
Ian Botham.
Yeah.
Alan Lamb, David Gower.
Yeah.
Brian Lara, Shane Warne. Shane, God love him.
Your mate Kevin Peterson.
Kevin Peterson, actually fantastic. Freddie Flintoff, Chris Gale. I mean, I could rattle, I've got loads of them, but they all turned out to be everything I hoped they'd be.
Right.
And that's maybe unique to cricket. I met some footballers, most of my legends, like Dennis Bergkamp, Thierry Henry. These guys were fantastic to me. I've known them quite well now. Fantastic. You know, I think it depends who your heroes are.
Of course. I mean, I don't really have heroes, but I mean, I have a great admiration for boxers.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to solve many Mensa puzzles with them, but I do enjoy their company because there's something about them that's so noble. And I think if you've been involved in football and you've owned a football club and you've worked around footballers and it's been your money, you will lose something about the love and affection for a footballer. I mean, I want to move you on from the news of the world to the Mirror and a crossroads for you, which is you lose your job over publishing photographs, and I'm not particularly interested in digging deep into what the photographs were, what they weren't, because you all have the shtick to be able to answer that question pretty easily.
We've done that many times,
But I want to understand what that felt like to you, because did it feel like failure? Because you fling those sort of epithets around. You called me a failed football club owner.
Yeah.
So was that failure for you?
I guess in the short term, it was certainly perceived that way. Did I feel that way? Not really. I think I'd done nearly 10 years of editing a daily paper. It's incredibly tough, that. I mean, you're doing 15, 16-hour days relentlessly, and there's very little break. And I loved it. But I'd written a 10,000-word synopsis of a book of diaries. And I knew I couldn't publish it while I was still the editor. And so the first call I got was from my literary agent saying, good news, you can do the book, which I did. And it was a #1 bestseller. So another little part of my life and career developed from that. So I've always felt, I remember Kelvin McKenzie, probably an old...
I like Kelvin.
I like Kelvin.
I didn't like him years ago. He used to get on my nerves.
Yeah.
Because he switches his allegiance between one football club and another. And he wrote a newspaper article which I didn't take kindly to and was going to sue him. But I really like him now. And I like him in this incarnation because he doesn't give a shit what he says.
Well, Kelvin's been great to me in my career. You know, he really did. Took a gamble on me, gave me a column when I was very young. I think helped get me the News of the World job. He's been great. But I always remember him, he used to give me these little pearls of wisdom. One was never try and edit a newspaper on a hangover. One was if you're in the shit, get out of it as fast as you possibly can. Don't keep digging, you know. And he had all these things, and he would just say to me about failure and success and stuff. Just, you got to ride the good times, because when you have a bad time, everyone will kick you, right? Yeah. So I've always tried to enjoy the good stuff. Celebrate it.
Yeah.
So when I was fired from the Mirror, for example, I remember calling Kelvin and bursting out laughing and all thing. I watched my own obituaries on TV with a bunch of mates with fine white wine and Chinese meal. We had a good time laughing at it all, and it all seemed a sort of out of body experience. And then the next day it was actually 20 years ago this month.
I know it is. Yeah.
And the very next morning, I was fired on a Friday night, and the very next morning was Arsenal Leicester at the Emirates. And we had to, a Highbury actually, 2004. And we had to avoid losing to go on invincible. That was the last game of the season. We'd already won the league. And I had 50 paparazzi and camera crews outside my flat in Fulham. And I had an underground car park so I could avoid them all. Took one of my boys, or two of them, I think, to the game. We were 1-0 down at half time. And I started getting all these texts saying, when it rains, it pours, mate, blah, all the usual stuff. And then...
the sort of stuff you'd send, yeah.
Of course. And then Vieira and Thierry came to the party and we won. And I grabbed a plastic Premier League balloon, and the pictures are next on the front page of every paper were me, shame-faced Morgan, but with a massive grin on my face with a Premier League balloon. And I would say that picture encapsulates my view of triumph and disaster.
Right.
Is that I've had quite a few roller coaster moments in my career. And what Kelvin, this is why I mentioned him originally, he said the single most annoying trait that I had when I worked for him, and he was an editor I ever worked for, was that my ability to bounce back from a ferocious bollocking. He never had anyone who could do it as fast as I could. And that's because I used to view it as just something I had to get through quickly and change the mood music.
Mm.
And I advise people about this all the time. Rather than sulk or feel wounded or lie on the ground crying, actually the best response to any criticism, change the narrative as fast as you can. Rather than people dwelling on this negative thing and reveling in your negativity and misery, you change it to something better. I used to come back to him after an hour of a terrible bollocking for some cock up with a great scoop, and I'd make him happy. And I think that's been the mantra I've had through my career in life. It's like when you have a blip, change it. Don't sulk.
Absolutely.
Don't be moody. Is the point?
But that's probably one of the lackings in society that we've got, that people can't overcome adversity. I would suggest that people only get bollockings because the person that's given them a bollocking thinks they're worth investing time in.
Yes.
Why
waste energy?
Because otherwise you wouldn't waste your time with them.
We live in such a pathetic victimhood culture.
We do.
Right? Where everybody thinks that being a victim is a good thing.
I agree.
And that actually virtue signaling their victimhood. Yeah. I joke about it, but it's like when people say, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I just passed my driving test at the 8th attempt. It's like, why the fuck are you proud of yourself? 8 times to pass a driving test. Right. And it's that mentality. I see it all the time with people, especially on social media, because it kind of fuels it where rather than celebrate a success or winning, they'd almost rather celebrate losing or having something wrong with them.
Well, failure is all relative, isn't it? I mean, you and I have both lived in America. You've been over there, and we'll talk about CNN in a minute. And the culture of in America is a can-do mentality. It's not steeped in people being jealous of what you achieve most of the time. They're actually encouraging people to be successful. And it's looking at failure through a different prism, which is basically it's baked in that people are going to be going to make mistakes. And you show me someone that's never made a mistake, I'll show you someone that's never done anything. Which is why it's curious when you threw that little barb at me, because I'd had a go at you about one of your interviews on GMB about you're a failed football club owner, because I would look at that slightly differently. I'm a disappointed investor. Is how I'd like to categorize it. But if you were running a football club, could you be successful in it?
I don't know, actually, because I think the trouble is I'm a very emotional sports fan.
Yeah.
And so I look back on a lot of my tweets over the years when I'm feeling particularly fired up about something, and I wince.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've gone too far.
Yeah.
And been too personal, been too emotionally invested. But most real sports fans are like that. I don't know what I would call a proper sports fan who's incapable of having that kind of emotion, good and bad, right? Yeah. So I tend to overreact to great triumphs, overreact to great failure. I'm very rarely the placid guy in the middle, quietly sipping his Bovril saying, well, that was a fun game. I mean, my dad's a big Spurs fan, right, all his life. And he can happily watch Arsenal play another game and want me to win, right? I find this completely unconscionable.
Agreed. I mean, I in my time, I mean, I was a huge sports fan. My father was a footballer. I think you pointed out in my tweet I was a failed footballer, but I was pretty decent footballer.
Sometimes the truth hurts.
I wanted to go and make some money. I wanted to do something more important than go own the football club. But I learned to do the Rudyard Kipling thing, which is treat both imposters in the same way.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to get too high when we won and too disappointed when we lost, and I got to see more losing than I did winning. So I learned that.
But I always say to my sons, right, who are like 30, 26, 23. My daughter's a bit too young for this conversation yet, but I always say, we always go out and we celebrate the good stuff. If I have a good scoot, Ronaldo, whatever it may be, we go and we'll have a big, lovely dinner somewhere and we'll drink fine wine and have a good time. But we'll kind of do the same thing if I have a bad day. If something goes horribly wrong and I'm in the headlines or whatever it may be, we'll go and have dinner again. Because actually, it's quite good for kids, I think, to understand that you're still there. You're okay.
Yeah.
The food's going to taste the same. The wine's going to taste the same. Probably slightly better when you're having a bad day, actually. And everyone who goes through a sort of firestorm, they'll all tell you the same thing. I remember Jeffrey Archer and Jonathan Aitken, the MPs who obviously both got disgraced, both said the public were great with them. It was only the media rough and tumbling them. The public, invariably, they said, were great. And the British public is a very forgiving beast.
They are. Yeah.
I've had it. I mean, you're quite a polarising figure, so am I. But I never get any crap in the street at all.
No, I don't.
I mean, literally, I can count on one hand in 10 years.
I get a lot of crap on social media, and I'm pretty sure you do too.
Because they can hide behind their keyboards,
absolutely.
and it's all cowardly stuff. As long as they spell things wrong and I can correct their spelling, bring it on.
I'm going to talk to you about reductive observations and some of the interviews that you've done recently that I've sort of looked at and watched and gone, I like what you're saying, Piers, but I'm not quite sure where you're going with it. I'll come to that in a second, but I want to talk to you about Arsenal. and your relationship with Arsenal. By the way, why are you an Arsenal fan?
Charlie George.
Charlie, what's that got to do with you?
1971.
Right.
And my dad was massive Tottenham, and he took his eye off the ball. Arsenal won the double in 71. I was about just under 5.5. 6 when we won the FA Cup. Charlie George scored that screamer at Wembley, the famous screamer.
I remember.
And I just fell in love with him. Yeah, and my mum said literally within a week, he was up on the wall, the team were up on the wall, Bob Wilson was up on the wall, George Graham, the whole team, John Radford, Ray Kennedy, was a fantastic team. And I was an Arsenal fan from that day, and that was 54 years ago.
Do you think when you've touched upon your tweets and your observations, and some of them have been very strident, and you've explained the reasons why. Do you feel that given the nature of people's perception of you, the influence that you have, and you regularly crow about how many social media followers that you've got and how important that is?
So would you have had as many as me?
But I wouldn't care. I really wouldn't care.
Well, everyone says that when they got less than me.
But most people got less than you, mate.
The only person that made me feel bad was Ronaldo. He went, "How many have you got?" I went, "Yeah, I've got about nearly 9 million." I get 9 million in a day.
But I don't get validation from a bunch of randoms following me. It doesn't give me any substance.
The size does matter, Simon.
Well,
it does.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Not really, no.
It is.
And people that say that tend to be on
the
small side generally
that are following you. But I mean, I looked through some of your tweets and looked at some of the observations, some of the things that you said, and I look at these, what I consider to be canker sores on the bottom of Arsenal, like Arsenal Fan TV, that are just steeped in destructive.
Oh, I love Arsenal Fan TV.
It's garbage.
No, you're wrong.
It's low rent thinking. It's destructive.
And they're passionate and they love their club and they just want to win. Honestly,
but
they just want to win. No, but we've been through a very fallow period of 20 years of league failure, which for the prices they charge for Arsenal season tickets, I think they're still the highest in Europe, right? We have an expectation level that's high.
Yeah.
And they're right to, because they charge us the earth to watch the team.
Yeah, but Liverpool went through 30 years and they don't have a bunch of fans like you lot.
We're the best fans in the world.
On what level?
We drink the finest wine. We have the best prawn sandwiches.
That's fantastic. But I do think, I look at it and I find myself saying, when you make these observations, because you know, I can say, well, who cares what Piers Morgan thinks about sport, right? But you have a view. It does get picked up. I've seen you writing newspaper columns about sport. You're quite passionate about it.
Yeah.
So it's part of this conversation is going to be about.
But I'm only a fan, so I never presume to be anything else.
Are you a fan or are you a supporter?
Both. But I don't believe in uncritical support about anything. I don't believe it with my kids, so why would I start with a football team?
Well, there's got to be balance and context and everything.
Sure, but if my kids have a terrible...
You go off on a tangent.
If my kids behave badly or they lose 8-0 at football, I'm not the type of parent that puts my arm around them and goes, "Are you all right?" I go, hang on, what happened here?
But there is a difference between being a fan and a supporter, in my view.
What's the difference?
Well, I think supporters support things and fans dip in and dip out.
What's a load of crap? You don't even believe that. Let me finish you do not believe that.
I do, actually. Let me finish my point.
It's like North Korea.
I don't think
you should just say everything's wonderful.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think you should defend the indefensible. But I think there should be enough latitude to be able to give your support until it's absolutely unsupportable. And
I never stopped. Hang on. Hang on. Let me clarify. I've never not supported my club.
No.
Right? But there are individual managers and players who, for whatever reason, I have believed have served their time.
Yeah, but it's preposterous.
That doesn't mean I don't support Arsenal.
It's preposterous what you said about Wenger.
Rubbish.
It's preposterous.
History has proven me completely right.
How?
Because for the first, here's what I said.
Look at the league.
Here's what I said. For the first 8 years...
8 years, he was great.
Hang on. Let me
World class.
Well, don't put words in my mouth.
No, I'm paraphrasing what you said.
First 8 years, he was the best manager in world football. He won the league 3 times against Alex Ferguson, who many view as the greatest of all time, right. against a brilliant United team, right? He went toe-to-toe, and 3 times we did it. We won the double twice, and we went invincible. Best in the world, in my estimation.
There were a lot of draws.
And for the last 14 years of his tenure, sadly, he was a shadow of the manager he'd been before. And that's why we didn't win the league.
But Piers, with due respect, you're looking at it through the prism of United and Arsenal and Ferguson and the powerful force that Man United was. But the game changed. In came Roman Abramovich, and in came a whole new set of rules. And off you're going, saying, "Well, I tell you what, I'm going to judge Wenger by a set of standards that don't take into context."
Oh, please, Leicester City won the league in this period you're talking about.
Yeah, in 2016. Yeah,
but how did they do it then?
But we're also talking about Arsenal going through a period which you'd have bitten your arm off.
Well, you might have done as a Palace guy, yeah.
No, but in the last 5 or 6 years, your team has finished 8th, 6th, and now they've got their asses in gear. But over a period of time, I'm not an Arsenal Wenger acolyte. I'm not a David Dean acolyte. I've had experiences of both of them.
I love David Dean.
I know you do, and I'm going to see David tomorrow, actually.
I literally love that
and
man.
I shall be told by David how he's solved all the problems in
And he's
football.
one of the great...
He's very smart, by the way.
Unsung heroes of Arsenal.
No, he's not. David is regularly singing about himself, and I've read his book. And then,
it's a great book.
It's a great book. The most wonderful part of it, of that book, is when I was reading it, was the chapter where David talks about, I don't need any recognition, and I don't need any self-aggrandizing, and then spends the entire book telling us exactly how he solves all the world problems. You'll probably be able to.
I'm like
relate
that. Only I never make a pretense.
Yeah, but I look at it and say, those are ridiculous observations that you made, because I think Wenger.
Yeah, but history proves you wrong.
How?
Because Arsenal went through a terrible period.
Second, third,
no,
fourth?
It was mediocre crap where Wenger kept talking about coming fourth as a trophy and all this kind of thing. It was nonsense. And unfortunately, he became what I call a glorified architect. He was more obsessed with having a great stadium. I would have gone back to Highbury. Honestly, I much preferred Highbury. I still do. I like the Emirates, but Highbury was a proper football stadium.
But you still haven't won the league.
We haven't won the league since we moved to a big fancy stadium, which is all Wenger talked about, the stadium. I don't care about the stadium. I care about having the best football team. When we were at Highbury, we had the best football team.
But the stadium is all relative, isn't it? I mean, you needed to have a new stadium.
Look, I love Arsene Wenger for what he did for Arsenal, but he stayed at least 12, maybe 14 years too long. And I'm afraid when he left, the old saying, there's not a dry eye in the house. There wasn't a wet eye in the house.
No,
no one shed a tear when Wenger left. And I feel sad for him no one stepped in and said to Arsene, I would have gone if I was him.
But that's because
if I'd been a real friend of his. Well, hang on. If I'd been a real friend of his, after we managed to, we were 2-0 down to Hull City in the FA Cup final, and we pulled back to win 3-2. And that was the nearest thing to a league victory we'd had, because it was the nearest we were ever going to get in that period of Wenger's tenure. If he'd gone then, he would have gone an absolute hero. He would have been like 6-7 years after the Invincibles, enough time to say, okay, time has moved on, football's moved on, you can't compete at the level you used to, let's just shake hands and you go a hero. We'll build a statue, fantastic. But he dragged it on for another like 7 years, and it was heartbreaking for people who, like me, love Wenger. I just wanted him to wake up and smell the coffee.
I grant you, in an ideal world...
And he was chasing the dream of winning the league again, and we never came close.
I grant you, in an ideal world, you get to do what Jurgen Klopp has done, which is leave the room with people wanting more rather than less.
Yes.
I mean, you made an observation about Arteta, about him and his contractual situation.
Yeah. I wouldn't have given him that new 3-year contract when we'd gone 2 seasons losing 13 league games a season.
But you'd be wrong then, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Right.
I wrote a whole column about why I was wrong.
Why were you wrong?
Because he turned out to be a fantastic appointment by Arsenal. It just took 2 years for him to start to realise his promise. And maybe there's a lesson for all of us in this social media-driven era to be a little bit more patient. I certainly agree with that. I saw David Moyes the other day, bumped into him in a bar. And I said, I often think about you at Manchester United. You got 9 months. Could United have spared themselves a lot of pain if they'd given him the kind of patience they gave Alex Ferguson when he first went there, 4 or 5 years?
But world's turned, different dynamics, isn't it?
It has, but David Moyes got 9 months. And yet there's a top manager if he'd had a bit more time and patience, but the fans don't want to have that patience. I'm as guilty of that as anyone. Yeah. I mean, Arteta, most Arsenal fans after the first 2 seasons when he was in charge, I think it was a lot of rumblings that it was simply he got this job too early, that he was not ready yet to do this. And then I watched the Amazon series.
Yeah.
And the first 3 episodes, I was like, I was right. Look at him. He's doing these stupid things.
Yeah, he's a flake.
I just thought it's not going to run.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely through that series, I saw 2 things happen. The players gravitated to him, and then the fans gravitated to him and the players in a way I've not seen. When I was at the Emirates at the weekend for the final game, the atmosphere was like nothing I've ever heard at the Emirates, ever.
No, I mean, I agree with you.
He has created a very special bond
I agree with
between the fans, the players, the staff, and everything. And I take my head off to him. But if you'd asked me 2 seasons in, I'd have said, you know what, I don't think he's ready for this.
Yeah, and I was kind of in the same camp when I went to the Emirates last year when you played Man City. I was amazed at the intensity of the atmosphere. When he came in, I was like him. Think he's sensible, like what he's saying. Then I began to think he was all theory and no substance. And then when he dealt with Aubameyang, I felt that's a turning point, because some, in typical football terms, people say pick the biggest beast in the dressing room and everyone else just falls into line. But I think it was a defining point. I think you didn't agree
Didn't
with
agree
that.
with it because I liked Aubameyang, and I felt that his big problem with Aubameyang, from what I gathered from people inside the club, was he was a bad timekeeper, in which case don't make him captain. And he turned up late for the North London derby, not too late for the game, but he was dropped and benched or whatever. And there was clearly a friction between an older player who just didn't respond very well to a rookie coach. And it was a shame because, funny enough, the one thing we probably need right now is an Aubameyang-like striker. It's the one missing cog in the wheel, which Arteta now has to get right. Because I look at the crucial games this season, the Aston Villa game when we lost at home, the Bayern Munich home and away, and you look at those and you think if you'd had a proper striker, there were so many chances.
I just think he was outthought tactically by Unai Emery. And
but we have the chance. We have the chances, is my point.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lethal predatory striker.
But you also, I think, over Christmas, Man City don't draw and lose 2 games over Christmas.
No, well, we lost to Fulham and West Ham. You can't do that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Before I close the subject of Arsenal, do you think Arteta's got the chops?
Yes.
Do you think he wins the league pretty soon?
Yes.
Do you think he wins it next season?
Well, maybe, but if that's Pep's last season, then Pep will be determined to go out 5 on the bounce.
Yeah.
And he is, I think, now the best manager in history. I think he's got a very good claim to that. I always thought it was Fergie, but I think Pep is just incredible.
Yeah.
But I think that Arteta is a natural successor in world football to be the next Pep. I cannot say enough highly about everything about Arteta. And it's what I do as a journalist. I read all the long inside pieces about Arsenal and what's going on, all the little things he does with the families, with the staff, with this, all the little stuff, the coaching stuff. And I also look at one thing with managers. Do they improve players? Right? To me, that's the thing. Alex Ferguson won the league in his last year, 2013, with a pretty ropey Man United team.
Agreed.
But he was able to make shit shine, if you like, right? And an ability of a plot. And I think it's where Arteta's been brilliant. If I look at players like Odegaard, right, how they've improved under him. Declan Rice already up another gear from where he was.
Well,
even at West Ham.
He's playing with better players as well, isn't he? He's playing with better players.
That's what Rice says.
Yeah,
Rice says that. But I do think also Arteta makes players play better. He improves them. Kai Havertz, classic example. Everyone at Arsenal for the first couple of weeks, months even.
We'll see about Kai Havertz.
Well, look, he did a lot better than people thought.
Yeah.
I don't think he's our main striker, but as a guy who proved people wrong this season, absolutely.
I want to go back into media and the sort of outlook and disposition that media has in this country. And I want to compare and contrast it with other places that you've been in. I mean, you've been in the US and worked there and been very significant and a very big show. Are they as divisive as each other? Because I do think the media is divisive. I get fed up with the media because I don't think it, as I said to you earlier, one doesn't have context and nuance, and it wants to be one-dimensional. And sometimes
America's far worse than here.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Yeah. But I'm going to relate it to something that Jesse Marsh said to me in an interview, right, where he said there's a total tabloid culture here. There is something in English culture about the sort of negative, edgy, cutting way of looking at things. An American monarchy is, our truth is we believe we can achieve great things. We believe in ourselves. And if people want to knock us down, that drives us on more. The culture of envy here is sad and it's pathetic.
I actually don't think there's a lot of difference. I mean, I think that America's become very divided like we have. They had Trump, we had Brexit, very similar, left v right, very toxic, very tribal, very vicious. Both countries have lost that ability to disagree and remain friends.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame. And we have to try and deal with that as societies. It's fueled by social media, where algorithms drive people deeper and deeper into their tribe. And also this whole weird thing where the liberal left, which is where I've always sat politically, you know, just slightly left of center, old-fashioned liberal. The woke left have become so insane. You know, this whole cancel culture phenomenon is ridiculous, that it's the left driving it, that people who call themselves liberals think it's perfectly acceptable. If someone doesn't agree with you, you have them shamed, vilified and cancelled. I mean, when did liberals start doing this? They're supposed to be the ones who created freedom of speech. So I find that really dispiriting to see. And we've got to get back to what we're doing right now. It's like with football clubs. If I got a mate who's a Chelsea fan, we'd banter each other all the time. But the idea we would fall out over this and I couldn't talk to him, or would have to have him destroyed because he supports another football team. It's the same logic. It's insane. And we've become just slightly insane about
did that kind of outlook, you describe it as a liberal left or perhaps even a woke culture. Did that, in your view, contribute to your ultimate cancellation on CNN?
It was a bit more complicated. I mean, the CNN thing was not quite how people think. I had a 3-year contract with a 1-year extension.
Yeah.
And then actually I got into the whole guns debate with Americans.
Well, I was going to bring that up, yeah.
And it was a cultural thing where me as a snotty Brit telling Americans how to lead their lives went down badly.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean I was wrong. I think I was right. But there are,
But you've got to give them what they want, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, Jay Leno, who was a great American TV chat show legend, he said to me, Piers,
took over
it's
Johnny
like,
Carson, right?
Yeah, brilliant. And he said to me, it was like if you went to Germany and appeared on TV every night in Germany and said to them, you shouldn't be speeding on the Autobahn. He said that the smart crowd would agree with you. He said, but most Germans would not only disagree with you, but they would hate hearing it from your accent. And he said, and we feel the same way. He said, in LA and New York, I bet everyone loves you. I went, yeah. He said, yeah, but that's not America. America's middle America.
Yeah.
And in Texas and Florida and Alabama and Georgia and these places where I've traveled a lot over the years, they were listening to this snotty Brit sounding like, King George III, who they got rid of with guns, telling them to give up their guns, which they believe they're a constitutional right to have. So if I had my time again, I wouldn't be as antagonistic.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean,
it.
David Carr, the New York Times journalist, wrote on you, didn't he? He wrote, an unhappy collision between a British television personality who refuses to assimilate. The only football he cares about is round, and his lectures and guns were rife with contempt, and a CNN audience that is intrinsically provincial.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah?
Yeah, he was right. He was right. I like David Carr. He's a very revered television critic. And I remember reading that piece and thinking, yeah, he's right. And that's when I left. And they actually offered me a new contract to do 2 series of 10 big interview specials a year. It was actually Jeff Zucker offered it to me, who is now known for trying to buy the Telegraph here. And I thought about it. And in the end, I thought actually going from a nightly show to doing something a lot smaller, I was better off just cutting my losses. But I had nearly 4 years at CNN. I did 1,200 shows. I interviewed the biggest stars in the world, the biggest politicians. I had some amazing fun times, did some dramatic stories, from the killing of bin Laden to the Arab Spring uprising to whatever. And I have absolutely no regrets, but I was very happy to come home. All my family and friends were here. So it was a sort of, after nearly 4 years, I was like, yeah, I'm done. And they were like, yeah, we're done. It was good. It was a very amicable parting of the ways and not really how people thought it was. But at the heart of it was my refusal to back down from taking on the NRA about guns, because I think they've been one of the most insidious.
Did it feel like a failure, though, having you cancelled?
Well, it depends what a failure. I mean, no one in British television history has ever done what I did. I did it for nearly 4 years. I did 1,200 shows. Is that a failure to then come home after 4 years? Maybe, but no one else has ever done what I did. I was in America's Got Talent for 6 years. It was the #1 summer show in the ratings for 6 years. I did Celebrity Apprentice, the first series of that in America. I won it. Donald Trump chose me as his winner and then became president. Maybe my American TV career has been a failure. I'd like to see somebody else's compare with it.
No, fair enough. I mean, I want to go on to the interviews and some of the people that you've interviewed and some of the conversations that you've had. And I'm going to try and equate them to the ethos of this show. So they're going to be sort of leaning towards the sports things. By the way, thank you for sticking up for me when Eddie Hearn decided that I was a wanker in his last conversation. I did pick up on that. It did surprise me that you stuck up for me there. And I quite like him, by the way.
I love him.
I can take or leave his dad.
And I love the Hearns. They're great.
And Barry loves himself as well.
Of course, we all do.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But listen, if you're going to be a promoter, you might as well be the biggest self-promotion of yourself. Absolutely.
And also, if you don't love yourself, why doesn't anybody else love you?
Everyone else loves you. Absolutely.
I do believe that.
I believe that too.
I think self-confidence also is a thing that a lot of younger people today seem to
But there's
lack.
a balance, Piers, isn't there, between believing in yourself. I believe if you don't believe in yourself, you can't get other people to believe in yourself. But there's also a balance between self-aggrandizing and being obsessed with creating a reaction in other people so that you can almost live vicariously through them.
I think all you have to do in life is be good at what you do.
I agree.
Right? Then you can be...
And the rest will take care of itself.
A lot of my favourite sportsmen are arrogant, right?
Yeah.
But they're brilliant.
What's with this style of interviewing that you do sometimes, that I watch you and I watch conversations that you have with people and I'm trying to work out what you're trying to achieve from these conversations, because you take a topic and you seem to make it quite reductive. And by that,
what do you mean?
I'll give you an example. When you're talking to Mick Lynch, right, over trade unions and bringing the country to a halt and the issues around their right to do it and their behaviour, and fundamentally I agree with the things that you're saying to him and the account that you're holding to. And then you take it into a space where he's the hood. And I think...
You know why?
Because he had it on his profile picture.
Yes.
Fine, but that's still reducing the conversation to its lowest common denominator.
It was funny.
But you're taking a topic.
And his reaction was hilarious. He got really wound up.
I know he did.
I put the old rod out, and I got a massive nibble, and I reeled him in.
But then again, I would say, like,
I can't believe you took that seriously.
No, I didn't take it seriously, but I kind of find it low resolution thinking. And I go, what's Piers doing here? He's got a good subject, and he's taking the conversation.
Literally having a bit of fun.
That's it.
That's it.
For clicks.
No, for fun.
For content.
For fun.
It just feels a bit substanceless. It feels like I'm watching you going, come on, Piers, this is great.
I like doing some things occasionally for no reason at all other than to have a laugh.
I'm watching you smack around Dale Vince, which I quite enjoy because he's a supercilious sod, right?
Yes.
And then you take it into avocados.
Yes.
And I'm like...
It's my favourite argument.
What are you, an entertainer, or is this serious news?
Bit of both. I think all of it is theatre. This is theatre.
Yeah, agrees.
Right?
Yeah,
it's all sport is theatre. Yeah. Politics is theatre. When Rishi Sunak comes out and announces an election, he's covered in rain because someone's forgotten to put an umbrella out. It's all theatre. Life is theatre. Right, but
it has to have substance attached to it. You want to be serious. You want to be taken seriously.
Of course. And listen, today I interviewed the president of Israel for half an hour. Yeah. That was very serious, right? But then I had about nearly an hour with Dennis Quaid, the movie star, who was fantastic. We spent 10 minutes of it talking about baby reindeer. He'd watched the series and my interview with the real life Martha, and I wasn't expecting that. So I like to have light and shade with everything I do. And I think that whether it's a work-life balance, whether it's doing an interview that can be quite heavy but maybe have some levity. I thought with Lynch, he came to play. He came to give me a bit of rough and tumble and get his clicks online, and he got that. And I got millions of people liking and clicking on the Hood thing, which was just a laugh. Someone said to me, "You won't believe what his profile picture is on Facebook. It's the Hood, who's an evil villain. Great, it's funny." You're taking it way too seriously. Even now, you're trying to pretend not to laugh.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking it through and listening to what you're
staring at me grimly.
I'm staring at you.
There's no sinister subplot.
I'm listening to this load of bullshit with great intent.
No, but I mean it. It's worse than you think.
No.
It's worse than you think. Because I literally did it just for the laugh.
Because I take things seriously. And I look at the news and I look at the responsibility that the news has. And I get very cross sometimes watching certain aspects of it, and with some of the views that you hold during COVID and some of the things that you said at the time, which I thought were so.
Well, some were right and some were wrong.
Yeah, and
I've apologised for the ones that were wrong.
Do you feel when you have these strong views? Any kind of responsibility for some of the things that you say?
Yeah, and actually looking back at COVID is a very good example of where officials give you a line, particularly scientists, actually, it turned out. Politicians I never trust. But when a body of scientists tell you, for example, that with the COVID vaccine, if you took it, you couldn't transmit the virus, then it became...
Which is nonsense.
Okay. But at
any reasonable person would have thought, hang on a second, a vaccine is to suppress your symptoms, not to stop
if you
transmission.
Remember, this was what they said, right? And I'm doing a morning show every day, and it's pretty dramatic. One of my colleagues is off because her husband is fighting for his life with COVID, right? So it's very personal for us, right? And we were all fired up about this and very emotional. I lost 4 or 5 people I knew to COVID, right? I had a lovely friend of mine who had to say goodbye to her mother on FaceTime on a phone because they wouldn't let her go and see her in the care home where they ripped through the care home because the government had been so callous and reckless in the way they handled care homes. So I felt very strongly about it. But on that singular point, I was very judgmental of people then who didn't have the vaccine. Because I believe the science when they said to me, if you have the jab, which is safe, you can't transmit it. So I thought people who didn't have it were putting themselves before potentially killing the granny in the street. Then they did a U-turn. Then they said a few months later, actually, it now looks like there's not much difference in transmission between whether you've had the jab or not. And at that point, I did a screeching U-turn. And I've apologized for it since because actually I shouldn't have been that judgmental. I should have realized science evolves and it may change. And I was appallingly judgmental. Appallingly. I was saying that, if footballers don't have a jab, they shouldn't be given treatment if they get injured and stuff like that. Crazy stuff, right? Intemperate, judgmental, wrong. And the moment...
So going forward,
I would be different.
Not just on the COVID and stuff
but generally I would be different.
Per se.
Yeah, generally different. I've learned a big lesson, I think, that in a big, particularly a health crisis, where it's moving all the time. Originally they said that masks wouldn't help you. Then we all had to wear masks. Now they're not even sure how effective they were, and so on. Things change. And to be too judgmental in the moment...
Well, you pivoted out of that because your boy was caught not wearing one.
I was caught not wearing one, right? I've been to a restaurant with Joan Collins. We all sat 2 yards away from each other in those weird times.
So, hypocrite then.
And no, you know what I did? You know what I did? I walked to a cab in a mask, I had a 5-minute conversation with the paparazzi. It was standing there. It was an old guy I knew from the days at the Mirror. We didn't shake hands. We sort of did a little fist bump thing. And he wished me all the best for Christmas. I got in the cab and I took my mask off for 2 seconds to call home. And he pinged me through the window. And the next day, the headline on the Daily Star was Piers Morgan. Yeah. So he absolutely did me up like a kipper. But you know what? Fair enough. I was being very censorious. So fair enough. I have no problem with that. I think that I was wrong, and I learned a good lesson in not racing to be too judgmental. But I still believe the vaccine saved millions and millions of lives, including possibly my own. I got COVID at the Euro Championship final against Italy when everyone invaded the stadium, and a lot of people got COVID. And I was very sick for about a week. I mean, I had 104 fever for a week, felt really as ill as I've ever felt in my life. I then got long COVID for 7-8 months where I had no taste, no smell, 20% energy. And I thought, if that's the rest of my life feeling like this is awful, right? And then it just went as quickly as it came. And I do wonder if I hadn't been jabbed up, would it have killed me? I don't know. I'll never know, right? But most doctors who've looked at it now for a number of years believe the vaccines were incredibly effective with the vast majority of people, albeit, as with all medicine, including, by the way, paracetamol, ibuprofen, certain people have a reaction and certain people die. And it's just incredibly sad that happens. Absolutely. But there's no evidence that the COVID vaccines were any better or worse than their predecessor vaccines for that. So I have an open mind, though, about that. I'm not making the same over-emotional judgments about it because I've learned a lesson.
I want to discuss a specific example of someone you've interviewed. Because you're on this podcast, it'll be through the prism of sport. Tyson Fury. I mean, I wrote a column about him the other day. Because I'm fed up with his behaviour. I'm fed up with his outlook. I don't expect boxers to be saints. I don't expect them to be pillars of society. They're going to go around making, speeches about how everyone should be behaving wonderfully. But I think he's reached a point where his behaviour is unacceptable, and so is that of his family at times. You interviewed him. You bet him £1 million. Did he pay you the £1 million, by the way?
No, I let him off.
Did you?
It was a bit of fun.
I'd have made him pay, quite frankly. He's got a lot to say for himself.
I love Tyson Fury, though.
So did I.
I think he's a really interesting, thoughtful character. Very self-aware, very honest about stuff. I don't think his behaviour recently has been that bad compared to what it was like in his crazy period, which he came through. I was a bit forgiving of boxers, especially when they're being interviewed immediately after a fight like that.
Agreed.
One of the greatest fights I've ever watched. Usyk, an absolute warrior.
Indeed.
And when Tyson said the thing about, well, his country's at war, of course he's going to get I knew he would regret saying that, and he hasn't repeated it, right?
No, absolutely right.
So I give them a bit of attitude for that. I don't think his father shouldn't be headbutting people,
no, of course not.
right? And that's wrong. But look, Mike Tyson is someone that I've interviewed 6-7 times. I did his podcast, amazingly thoughtful, interesting interview, right? And yet Tyson, you could pick out moments in his career,
of course,
and paint a picture of an animal,
and
right?
very specific ones,
right. I think Tyson is, I've done lots of boxers. Lennox Lewis is a good friend of mine. I did Celebrity Apprentice with him. He beat me at chess 39 times out of 40. He reminded me a bit of Tyson. Smart guys, right? And I don't really agree with your assessment that right now his behaviour is that bad. Not Tyson. I actually think he's, he got a lesson in stamina. I think
you are
from
judged
Usyk.
by the people that you keep company with, right? So if your acolytes and your family are running around causing mayhem and saying dreadful things, then you have to take the responsibility of these are the company that you keep. And mine is about that. We've had instances with Tyson where I've been a huge advocate for him. In the room when everybody was Anthony Joshua, and the popular opinion was Anthony Joshua, and the unpopular opinion was Tyson Fury. Now, I've had the audacity to be critical of Tyson Fury on a couple of occasions, equitably critical, because I like to get balance into my conversation. If you can criticize, you can praise. If you can praise, you can criticize. And that's resulted in Tyson being abusive and unpleasant and insulting, and then banning a news network or a sports network from covering him. And I find that I don't think the media, like you said at the top of this conversation, nobody has a God-given right to have an answer to a question. And sometimes when I'm watching the television and I'm watching you or someone else, I'm thinking if I was on the other end of it, I'd go, piss off and mind your own business.
And you'd be entitled to.
I don't feel like answering that question.
And you would be perfectly entitled to.
Because, the media doesn't have a God-given right to answer this question. But Frank Warren came up with something yesterday. And I know that you heard it, or the other day,
I did.
And given the timing of when this goes out, right? Do you think it's a legitimate excuse to say, well, I tell you what, Tyson Fury is a brilliant boxer, and we all respect
Here's what
that.
I think. I think you're a little bit sensitive.
No, I don't think
because
I
I think you dish it out better, I have to say, and I mean this. I think as a broadcaster on television or radio, you dish it out as well as anybody. You're eloquent, you're researched,
and
you're
I'm happy
passionate.
to get it back.
But you're very confrontational.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
But if you're going to confront the world heavyweight boxing champion, right, and take him square on, you're going to get a smack in the face. And you shouldn't moan about it.
And that's fine.
Or have your little feelings hurt.
And that's my feelings aren't hurt.
They are a bit.
No, they're not. Not in the slightest.
You're a little bit thin-skinned.
No,
you remember all the little slights against you.
No, I don't.
You've quoted back mine to you.
No, because I'm in context with you. I'm having a conversation
they're
with you.
embedded in your mind.
If you get to call someone of
wounds.
I've got loads of things I could have said to you, but you won't give us a bloody out, or otherwise you'll be going through a long list of them. No. Listen, I mean, if I had a powerful everybody that called me a failed chairman, they couldn't walk a mile in my steps, so I don't worry about it too much. I'm a disappointed investor. It's not that. It's about I'm fundamentally steeped in fairness. I'm fundamentally steeped in belief that, equitability is an important equation.
Yeah, but not everyone's going to listen to your critiques and think you're being fair.
Well, it depends if you're one-dimensional in your critique. If you're praise...
Well, if you're questioning somebody's bipolar illness, for example...
No, I wasn't.
And if you are raising a spectre of doubt that maybe something they turn on when it's negative and not when it's positive, that could be very hurtful to someone who is bipolar.
Yeah, I grant you that.
And you may underestimate how hurtful that is or what kind of reaction that would then trigger in them.
Yeah, I mean, I still maintain...
Because my experience of Tyson Fury, and I've interviewed him a lot and been around him quite a lot, and I've known Frank a long, long time, and I've got a lot of time.
Me too.
A lot of time for Frank Warren, one of the really great guys that I've ever had to deal with. But I will defend Tyson Fury. I think he's one of the more fascinating characters in British sport ever. I think he's highly intelligent. I think given his background, which is not an easy background, right? I think he has taken himself to the very top of his profession. He's one of the greatest boxers we've ever produced.
I agree.
And I think that to be churlish about the odd, reaction back, he's a boxer.
No, I priced it into my thinking. You're mischaracterizing my thought processes. I'm in a perspective where I'm disappointed in him. I expect better from him, because I've seen this charismatic, enigmatic superstar.
But he's a pugilist at heart.
Oh, absolutely.
They all are those guys.
I've done these podcasts, I've done 10 boxers. You're not dealing with people that think about the world the way that we think about the world, because otherwise they wouldn't get in a boxing ring and get their face punched in.
So I would say it's slightly unfair of you to try and make them.
No, I don't think it is.
Like you would.
I think you judge them by the nature of your experiences with them. And I think when you've got somebody in front of you that's behaving in a fashion, being insulting and disrespectful, then perhaps...
But he felt you were.
No, I was being honest.
Well, okay.
No.
Oh, wait a minute.
No.
Your idea of being honest, I've heard it, right? I don't care.
It was accurate.
When you're honest, with me and giving me a few verbal jabs, you were. And when you're right, you're right. Sometimes you're wrong, and I won't hesitate to point out when you are.
Yeah.
But when you give the old verbal jabs, I've no problem with it. But lots of other people will take it personally.
You and I I think, align ourselves. I am pig-sick tired of listening to the mental health challenges of people in this country in terms of ultimately we've got a mental health crisis.
Yeah, it's the most healthy populace this country's ever had in recorded history. We're living longer. We have less disease. There are actually fewer wars than there have ever been. There's less child poverty. Every metric of life is better than it ever has been. The problem these days is smartphones, right? And it's turning kids late teens, early 20s, it is zombifying their brains.
Yeah.
We're exposing them to way too much dopamine, way too much negativity, way too much FOMO with all the Instagram perfection, the false bullshit stuff, right?
Yeah.
And all that. And I think we have to somehow retrain their brains. And I'm all in favor of sending people like Bear Grylls and Ant Middleton and all these guys into schools to lecture kids on how to be strong, how to be mentally strong.
Yeah.
Because being mentally weak is a recipe for total disaster in the real world. It's like schools, if we protect kids too much, we don't allow kids to enjoy winning and understand the pain of losing.
Absolutely.
Where little Johnny who comes last gets
participation medals.
It's just crap.
It's preposterous.
How does that prepare them for the real world?
Absolutely right.
Think in a company, you get a prize for coming last, you get fired.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think all of that, it doesn't prepare them. We're not preparing kids for the real world. And I feel really strongly about it. And I'm with my own kids, I'm very they're all different in different ways, but I try and instill in them, there's nothing wrong in pursuing a path to be mentally stronger, right? It's something you should be really pushing towards.
Absolutely right.
Being more resilient, soaking up things.
Overcoming adversity.
I always quote them until they get fed, they can recite the quote back to you verbatim, all my kids. But the Rocky Balboa speech to his son.
It's not how hard you can get, it's how much you can get back up.
In the sixth movie when he has it out on the street. Stop moaning about everything. You're fine, right? But it's about what you do when you get knocked down. Get up and keep moving forward. Because if you don't do that, you're lying in the gutter your entire life.
Absolutely right.
And that applies to whether you're some of the happiest people I've met in my life, the Soweto township in Johannesburg. I've never forgotten it. These little kids running around with the biggest grin, singing, dancing. They had nothing. They had nothing in the world. Whereas kids here have got everything. By comparison, and they feel like the world is. They feel like the world's terrible. I think it's wrong to assume that they are not really feeling this, because they are, and we know the suicide rate of young people has been increasing, which is incredibly concerning.
But we're steering into it and we're encouraging it.
I think we are fueling this problem, and we're not tackling it, and we're not helping them to overcome it. And I would love to be part of that, because when I do these podcasts, I talk about this, I get an amazing reaction from people. They're like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that," and so I think they want to be led.
Well, listen,
have we reached a point of a final agreement?
We have, and I'm glad that you didn't walk off this set.
Oh, that's enough of this.
Well done, Piers.
I enjoyed it.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Up Front with me, Simon Jordan, is brought to you by William Hill. For new weekly shows, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find audio episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. 18 plus. Please gamble responsibly.